On nights like this, in the chill grip of late autumn 425 BCE, victory's shadow stretches far beyond the battlefield. Torches sputter against the shattered walls of a Messenian village, their flames licking at the air like hungry tongues, casting jagged shadows over mud-churned lanes streaked with spilled wine and something darker, stickier. The air hangs heavy with the acrid bite of smoldering thatch and crushed olives, mingling with the sour tang of unwashed bodies and fear sweat that clings to the skin like a second layer of grime. Bronze armor gleams dully under the mist, red cloaks sodden and heavy as Spartan hoplites, fresh from routing the last defenders, prowl the outskirts, their sandals crunching over broken fig branches in the faint wet sounds of restrained sobs. A cluster of young girls huddles by an overturned cart, tunics torn at the hems, bare feet raw against the cold earth, their breaths coming in shallow bursts that fog the night. One of them, barely 14, wipes dirt from her face with a trembling hand, her eyes fixed on the officer stepping forward. He is Dorius, 28 seasons hardened by campaigns, his jaw scarred from a helot blade that got too close once. He doesn't shout, Spartans rarely do. His gaze slides over them like a merchant appraising grain. Height, build, the promise of strong hips for bearing sons. With a nod, he divides them. Some for the auction blocks in allied markets, others to be marched deeper into Laconia, bound not to chains but to the land itself. This one, he mutters in clipped Doric, pointing to the girl with the cut lip, she'll work the Cleroy. Price her high if any kin come begging. The words land like stones in still water, rippling out to drown the village's last whispers of hope. Sheep bleat from distant pens they'll never tend again. An owl calls from the black flanks of Tegetus, and the first iron rings clink as they're fitted to the cart's frame. This is no end to the war. For these daughters of the defeated, it's the beginning of something unspeakable, a system that counts their bodies as tribute, their futures as Sparta's unspoken arsenal. The Peloponnesian War rages on, pitting Athens' navy against Sparta's unyielding phalanxes. But here in the conquered fringes of Messenia, the real conquest unfolds in silence. Sparta, that iron-fisted oligarchy in the Peloponnese's south, has ruled these hills since the First Messenian War around 735 BCE. When their kings first crushed the Messenian revolt and branded the survivors helots, state-owned serfs tied to the soil like vines to a trellis. By 425 BCE, after the Second Messenian War sealed their fate 2 generations earlier, helots outnumber Spartan citizens 10-1, farming the fertile valleys while the homoioi, the equals, train for war in the Agagi's brutal forges. Power rests with 2 kings. August II now leads from the Eurypontid line, but the ephors, those 5 elected overseers, hold the reins, declaring war on the helots each year to legitimize the terror that keeps them in line. It's a fragile empire, shrinking as fewer boys survive the Agage to claim full citizenship, forcing Sparta to squeeze every drop from its subjects. Dorius embodies this machine, a mid-rank officer, loyal to the bone, who sees helots not as people but as the Cleroy's lifeblood, the land allotments each Spartan family exploits without lifting a plow. Across the village, his men bind the surviving men, staging a mockery of justice before the march to execution or the mines. But it's the daughters who draw his calculated eye. In a state where women like Archidamea, 30, and Stele manage estates with the authority of men, the helot girls become extensions of that power. Labor for the fields, wombs for the next generation of serfs. Thaleia, the girl he marks, comes from a line of smallholders whose grandfathers fought at Ihome. At 14, she's old enough to thresh barley but young enough to be molded. Her silence, a trait Dorius notes as useful. Lycon, 18 and fresh from the agoge, watches from the ranks, his dagger still warm from the fray, a flicker of unease stirring beneath his drilled obedience. The central conflict simmers here. Sparta's survival demands total domination, turning enemies' bloodlines into its foundation, but cracks form in the helots' quiet endurance, in Lycon's hidden doubts, in Thaleia's unblinking stare. If Sparta falters, if helots rise or refuse to breed under the lash, the whole edifice crumbles. No more phalanx, no more hegemony. For Thaleia, the stakes are her very self. Submit, and she vanishes into the estates, her children born to the same yoke. Resist, and the Cryptia comes calling, daggers in the dark. The torches gutter lower, the cart creaks as the first girls are loaded, and Dorius turns away, already tallying the tribute in his mind. This is Sparta's heart. Not glory on the shields, but the methodical claiming of what was never theirs. If you're drawn to documented records and buried histories of what conquest really meant for the most vulnerable, don't forget to subscribe to Epoch Ensemble. It helps us uncover more accounts hidden in crumbling archives and silent ruins. Now, back to the story. Dawn breaks gray over the village square, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood from the night's executions as Spartan heralds unfurl the terms of surrender. The white cloak on a spear, signal of capitulation, still dangles limp from a rooftop, but the real accounting begins now. Dorieus strides through the throng, his men herding the survivors into lines, wax tablets passed hand to hand as scribes scratch names, ages, and conditions. 14 summers, sound limbs, no wasting sickness. One recites flatly, his stylus pausing over Thaleia's entry. The men, disarmed and kneeling, face a sham tribunal, condemned in whispers for rebellion against the god's order. They're dragged away to the quarries, or worse, their cries echoing off the low stone walls until a spear butt silences them. Wives clutch children, but the daughters, those on the cusp of womanhood, are separated like wheat from chaff. Some, the frail or marked by scars, are bundled for immediate sale to Periakoi traders from allied towns, their worth pegged at 20 drachmae apiece, barely enough for a Spartan's monthly wine ration. Thaleia stands rigid as Dorieus circles her group, prodding shoulders, checking teeth with the indifference of a horse trader. These for the Claroi, he decides, waving aside a bidder from Tegea who eyes a taller girl. No auction for them, they're state property now. Allocated to replenish the Helot workforce thinned by revolt or cryptia culls. Whispers ripple through the captives. Tales of ransoms paid in silver talent, kin scraping together dowry-like sums from distant polis. But Sparta rarely bargains with the poor. By midday, the square empties, the clink of coins in chests the only sound left. A ledger closed on lives reduced to entries. Thaleia's line shuffles toward the road, the weight of her torn tunic chafing like a promise of the fields ahead, where her body will pay the tribute her father's blood could not. The march to Laconia stretches into days, feet blistering on the rocky paths winding past olive groves heavy with unharvested fruit, the sun baking the earth into a haze that blurs the horizon. Thaleia trudges with 24 others, roped loosely at the wrists, not to flee. For where would they go? Flanked by Lycon's squad, their shields slung low, eyes scanning for stragglers. The air carries the dry scent of time and dust kicked up by sandals, broken only by the occasional crack of a switch on a lagging girl's back. They pass burned farmsteads from earlier suppressions, skeletons of homes where Helot families once sang harvest songs, now silent warnings. At night, they huddle under threadbare cloaks, the ground hard and unforgiving, stars wheeling overhead like indifferent gods. Lycon, assigned to guard the rear, steals glances at Thaleia, her face set in that stubborn quiet he's starting to recognize from Agog's tales of unbroken Helots. Keep moving, he barks when she stumbles, but his voice lacks the edge of Dorieus's men. In the Agoge, they'd drilled him to see Helots as enemies, yet here, under the vast sky, the lines blur. By the third evening, they crest a ridge overlooking the Eurotas Valley, Sparta's heartland unfolding in terraced fields and whitewashed barracks. Archidameia's estate waits below, a sprawling claros of vineyards and barley plots, worked by 100 Helots whose grandparents were conquered like Thaleia's. The girls are unloaded like cargo, divided among the huts, some to the presses, others to the looms, Thaleia assigned to the threshing floors where the work never ends. Half the yield is mine, Archidameia declares that first dawn, her voice crisp as she surveys them from the porch. Her own chiton fine linen while theirs hangs in rags. Disobey, and your kin pay double. The sensory assault hits then, the relentless thud of flails on grain, the itch of chaff in every breath, the ache settling into bones too young for it. Thaleia grips her tool, watching Archidameia calculate portions like a general rations spears, knowing her value lies not in her hands, but in the sons she might one day bear to till the same soil. Weeks bleed into months on the Kleros, the rhythm of labor grinding down resistance like stone under a mill. Thaleia rises before light, her fingers calloused from binding sheaves, the air sharp with dew and the earthy musk of turned soil. Helot families eye the newcomers warily, some Messenian like her, others from older conquests, their whispers in the dim huts speaking of the annual war declaration, when Ephors and Sparta's assembly sanctify the Helots as perpetual foes. It's law. An elder mutters one night, passing her a crust of barley bread. Makes our blood theirs to spill. Archidameia rules with a ledgersman's precision, doling out rations that keep bodies working but minds dulled. Olives, cheese, the occasional fig, never enough to fuel dreams of escape. Dorieus visits quarterly, inspecting yields, his scar twitching as he notes Thaleia's progress. Stronger now, hips widening, a commodity appreciating in the Spartan calculus. She'll pair well, he tells Archidamea over wine, the vintage from her own helot-pressed grapes. Keep her from the Cryptaea lists. Lycan, rotated to estate patrols, lingers longer than duty demands, slipping extra water to Thaleia during heat waves, his agage oaths warring with a revulsion he can't name. Why fight it? He asks her once under the cover of a storm's rumble, rain lashing the thatch. Sparta lasts forever. She meets his eyes. Dirt-streaked but unbowed. Forever breaks, boy. Even iron rusts. The words haunt him as he reports back, the estate's fires crackling like warnings. Yet hope flickers in small acts. A hidden cache of grain, a song hummed in Messenian dialect when overseers turn away. Thaleia learns the Cleros' veins, the irrigation ditches for hiding, the mountain paths to Idhome where rebels once held out. But the system tightens like a noose. Helot girls like her are the linchpin, their labor funding the phalanx, their wombs ensuring the next wave of serfs. Archidamea knows it too, her own daughter's dowry swelling with land fragments bought on Helot backs, a mirror of the freedom Thaleia will never taste. As autumn returns, the Cryptaea's shadow falls heavier, the Ephor's war cry echoing from Sparta's halls like a ritual drumbeat. Lycan, now initiated into those night hunts, feels the weight of his dagger, its edge honed for Helot throats. The Cryptaea, Sparta's secret cull, targets the strong, the defiant, roaming the countryside under moonless skies to remind Helots of their place. On Thaleia's Kleros, fear thickens the air. Doors bar early, fires die to embers, mothers pulling daughters close as footsteps crunch beyond the walls. One such night, winds howling through the passes. Lycan slips from the barracks, his cloak blending with shadows, tasked with patrolling the borders. He spots movement, a Helot boy, perhaps fleeing to kin, and raises the blade, heart pounding with the Agage's echo. Kill the enemy, preserve the state. But it's Thaleia he finds instead, slipping toward the vines to bury a small hoard of tools, sabotage disguised as care. She freezes, eyes wide, but doesn't beg. Do it then, she says, voice steady. Add me to your count. His hand trembles. The Cryptaea demands proof, a trophy ear or lock of hair. But he lowers the weapon, whispering of roots to the hills, a betrayal that could end him. Dawn brings no bodies that night, but the estate buzzes with suspicion. Archidamea doubling the whips, her ledgers noting lost productivity. Thaleia works harder, her body a map of bruises, but inside, resolve hardens like flint. Whispers spread of greater revolts. Idhome's siege decades past, where Helots held the heights for years, daughters fighting beside fathers. Lycan's visits grow riskier, fragments of news from the warfront. Athens pressing, Sparta stretched, cracks in the facade. They're freeing some men for the lines. He confides one dusk. The scent of fermenting grapes masking their words. Auxiliaries, neodamodes they call them. But girls like you, you're the roots they won't cut. She nods, plotting in silence, the Cryptaea's terror forging not just fear, but the first sparks of something fiercer. Dorius senses the shift during his inspection, his scar paling as he questions Lycan sharply. The nights are long, boy. Make them count. The valley holds its breath, the unspeakable acts of control tightening, yet in Thaleia's unyielding gaze, the system's fragility glints like a hidden blade. Sparta's grip tightens not just through the sword, but through the womb. By the time Thaleia reaches her 19th year, the routines of Archidamea's estate feel as old as the hills themselves. The crack of dawn summons her to the threshing floor, the sting of chaff in her lungs. The grind of stone under bare feet as she circles the mill, pushing until her shoulders burn. Yet beneath that monotony, a calculation is unfolding, one that has nothing to do with grain yields. In Sparta's ideology, every body has a function. Citizen men to fight, citizen women like Archidamea to bear and manage, and Helot daughters like Thaleia to fuel the machine at the lowest level. Hands for the fields and bellies for producing the next generation of serfs. Word filters down from the city. Citizen families are shrinking, deaths in war outpacing births, property concentrating in fewer and fewer hands. Spartan women, it is said, inherit vast estates, own land outright, and oversee accounts with a confidence unthinkable in Athens. But their freedom sits on a foundation of Helot labor. Every time Archidamea signs off new seed purchases or barters surplus oil, she does so knowing that it is Thaleia's back, and the backs of women like her, that make those numbers possible. One evening, as the sky stains purple over the Eurotas, Archidamea calls Thaleia to the veranda. A cup of watered wine rests untouched beside her ledger. "You're of an age," she says, eyes coolly appraising. "You will take a man from the lower huts. Strong, obedient. Your children will serve my daughter when she takes this land." The words land like a sentence. There is no talk of consent, no ceremony, no dowry. Where Spartan women of citizen blood juggle suitors, land parcels, and legal contracts, Thaleia receives an assignment, her future reduced to a projected increase in estate manpower. The night air feels heavier as she walks back to the huts, the scent of crushed grapes clinging to her hair. She is not being asked to join a family, she is being folded deeper into a ledger. The pairing happens without fanfare. A helot man named Melon, older and worn, is pointed toward her by an overseer who cares only that he has strong arms and no record of descent. In another polis, a marriage might come with songs, feasts, a father giving blessings. Here, it is a silent redirection of bodies. The hut they share is low and cramped, woven mats barely softening the packed earth beneath. Outside, the chirring of insects mixes with the occasional barked order, dogs prowling between huts like patrolling thoughts. Melon understands more than he can say. His first wife died years ago from a fever left untreated because she was replaceable. He treats Thaleia with a gentleness that startles her. Hands careful, words few, yet nothing about this union belongs to them. Archidameia's steward notes it down as if registering livestock breeding, another line in a growing column. Days later, the estate's rhythms continue unchanged. Women at the looms and presses, men in the fields and vineyards, children ferrying water until their arms ache. But inside Thaleia, a new fear takes root, braided tightly with a new, bitter resolve. If she conceives, the child will be born into chains, its first cry echoing off the same rough walls that have heard generations of helot grief. Sparta's laws and customs demand that every pregnancy among the elites be celebrated. Strong sons for war, daughters to manage property. For helots, fertility is an economic boon, a multiplication of assets. There is no space in this calculus for the child's humanity, or for the mother's refusal. Each month that passes without quickening, Thaleia counts like a small victory, a defiance only she can feel, even as overseer's eyes linger too long on her belly. Beyond the estate, the wider world grinds on, each political tremor sending small shockwaves into the huts. Rumors seep through from traders, from wounded men cycling home, Spartan armies bogged down in distant campaigns, allies wavering, earthquakes shaking the very ground in regions once thought secure. Thaleia listens carefully as a traveling peddler, allowed onto the Kleros to sell cheap trinkets to Archidameia, mutters of a great tremor years back that toppled houses and opened fissures in the earth. Panic giving helots in other valleys a fleeting chance to run. Some fled to Ithom's rugged heights, reforming old strongholds, holding out long enough to force terms and resettlement. The story sinks deep into her, more nourishment than the thin stew she eats that night. The idea that helot feet have trod free mountain paths in living memory, that daughters once destined for estates like this now wake under open skies by choice, is a revelation. Lycan, when he returns with his patrols, brings a different kind of news. His face is more drawn, his eyes ringed with a weariness the Agog never trained him to show. He speaks of Neodamodeis, helots freed after fighting bravely for Sparta, rewarded, if that's the word, with a status above serfdom but below citizenship. Men, almost always men. Those women who marched with the army camps, cooked, washed, nursed wounds, or shared beds remained in the shadows, their contributions unrecorded. They free the sword hands, not the hands that bind the wounds. Thaleia says quietly as they pass in the olive groves, her fingers stained black from harvest work. Lycan doesn't answer. He knows it is true. The distance between them has shrunk since that night in the vines when he chose not to kill her, but it remains a gulf shaped by Spartan law. His future, though clouded by doubt, still holds pathways. Further rank, maybe a small plot if he survives. Hers is a narrowing corridor. Tension stretches thinner as seasons roll. Archidameia's daughter prepares for marriage, her dowry a staggering combination of land, coin, and helots. The negotiations that swirl around her life are almost abstract theater to Thaleia. Elders debating measures of barley fields, the value of orchards, the inclusion of entire helot families as part of the package. "This household and all its dependents," one Proxen says, gesturing with a stylus that in that moment might as well be a dagger pointing straight through Thaleia's chest. She realizes with a slow, dawning horror that when the daughter leaves for her new home, Thaleia and any children she bears may simply be part of the bridal train, transferred like chattel to a different master, their entire world upended by a marriage feast they will not attend. Spartan citizen women like Archidameia's daughter have more autonomy than most in Greece. They can inherit, manage estates, exercise in public. But their freedom is fenced by expectations. Bear many sons, protect family honor, uphold the state's needs, and beneath even that layered privilege lies the bedrock of exploited helot labor. Thaleia watches preparations in a muted daze, new cloaks being woven, amphorae of oil sealed, a fattened animal tethered for sacrifice. In the huts, helot women whisper of desperate measures. Some remember mothers in their own youth taking herbs to end pregnancies. Others speak of infants hidden away, fates unrecorded. Every choice carries danger. Infanticide, if discovered among helots, is punished not as tragic necessity but as defiance against Sparta's economic expectations. Yet the thought of handing a newborn into this system shreds Thaleia from the inside. When blood finally stops coming, replaced by a slow, nauseating heaviness, Thaleia understands that the window for certain forms of resistance has closed, and others have opened. Her body turns traitor and ally at once, breasts aching, back sore after long days in the fields. Archidameia's steward takes note without a word, simply adjusting the supply records and labor assignments. A pregnant helot is still expected to work, but care is taken not to break what is now viewed as an asset in progress. Thaleia is shifted from the back-breaking threshing floors to the looms and storage huts, where the air is drier, the dust finer, the monotony total. Her world shrinks to the clack of wooden frames, the scratch of jars on rough stone shelves, the muffled chorus of other women's breathing. At night, lying on her side on the woven mat, she presses a hand to her abdomen, feeling the faint stirrings within. The child is not to blame. She knows this in her bones. It is innocent as she once was, as her mother once was, before Sparta's shadow fell across their valley. But she cannot erase the knowledge that his or her first sight will be of an estate courtyard, not a free hillside, that the first language of their life will be commands. Lycon, when he hears, because nothing escapes the Clerus's rumor network, stares at her a long moment under the pretense of checking the storerooms. They'll count him, he says hoarsely, not specifying a sex but defaulting to the state's obsession. As soon as it's born, another line under output. She nods, the words lodging like grit beneath skin. Then she asks the question that has sat in her throat for weeks. Would you kill him if they ordered you to? Lycon flinches as if slapped. The Agog trained him to accept the unthinkable if commanded, the culling of weak infants among his own, the silent elimination of dangerous helots. But this? The thought of his dagger at the throat of a child born from this woman's pain shatters something inside him. No, he says, the first outright refusal to Spartan doctrine he has ever let pass his lips. No, I won't. It is a promise to her, and a betrayal of everything he has been raised to be. The birth comes during a storm that lashes the valley, wind howling like the ghosts of those who once tried to flee these lands. The hut fills with the ragged breaths of women. Older helots who have seen too many births guide Thaleia through each twisting wave of pain. There are no physicians, no citizen midwives, no herbs beyond what they can smuggle. Sweat stings her eyes, the straw beneath her soaked, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the sharpness of fear. For hours, the storm outside mirrors the storm within. Thunder rolling as her cries tear free despite her efforts to stay silent. Somewhere beyond the walls, Archidameia sleeps or pretends not to hear, trusting that her property will deliver another pair of hands for the fields. When the child finally slides into the world with a wet, fragile wail, time collapses to a single, blinding point. It is a girl. The midwife wraps the tiny body in a rough scrap of cloth, passing her to Thaleia with hands that have done this countless times. The baby's eyes squeeze shut against the dim light, her fists flailing, lungs testing the air of enslavement. Thaleia feels something fracture and fuse inside her at once, a love so fierce it steals her breath, and a rage so deep it feels like it could crack stone. Outside, the storm begins to ebb, rain softening to a patter that masks the child's first cries. In Sparta proper, citizen men might examine newborns under the cold gaze of elders, deciding who lives, who is cast aside. Here, no one comes. There is no official inspection. The state's pronouncement is implicit. She lives, but not for herself. Days blur as Thaleia navigates new exhaustion layered atop old burdens. She returns to work sooner than her body is ready, breasts aching and leaking under her tunic as she hauls jars and measures grain. The infant, named quietly in the old Messenian tongue when no overseer is near, lies in a slung cloth at her chest. Tiny weight, both comfort and chain. Lycon sees them together for the first time in the shadow of the storage sheds. Something in his expression shifts, a recognition that this is not an abstract helot unit, but a particular mother and child whose lives his city has claimed. "She'll grow strong," he says, trying on hope like an ill-fitting cloak. "Spartan land makes strong bodies." Thaleia meets his gaze, voice low. "Strong enough to carry your masters, you mean?" There is no malice in the words, only a tired clarity. He doesn't argue. He has seen the evidence inscribed on helot bodies across the valley. Bowed backs, scarred hands, eyes that have seen too much. Yet he has also seen something else. Quiet acts of subversion. Care networks that outlast overseers. Songs hummed that carry memories older than Sparta's rise. Holding the baby, Thaleia begins to think in two tracks. How to keep this girl alive in the short term, and how to feed her stories strong enough to outlive the system designed to break her. At night, she whispers tales of Athome's rebels, of free villages where daughters chose their own paths, of mountains that shelter those bold enough to climb. Each lullaby is both comfort and curriculum, a seed planted that may sprout in years he cannot see. As the child grows, so too do the tremors shaking Sparta's supremacy. Defeats abroad, restive allies, the slow, inexorable decline of the citizen body, all chip away at the image of a city-state destined to rule forever. On Archidameia's estate, the signs are subtle but real. More frequent visits from tax assessors, anxious consultations over how to meet quotas with fewer able-bodied citizens at home, pressure to squeeze more from helot labor. Dorius returns with deeper lines around his eyes, his scar puckered and pale. He walks the Kleros with a new urgency, tallying not just grain and oil, but heads. Helot men for potential auxiliaries, women for their reproductive output. When his gaze falls on Thaleia and her daughter, now toddling unsteadily beside a pile of amphorae, there is a flicker of something almost like pride. "Your line serves Sparta well," he says curtly. "See that she grows swift." The possessive is unmistakable. Lycan trailing behind feels bile rise in his throat. In another life, another polis, perhaps he would have courted a free woman, counting on their shared children to carry his name and land. Here, he watches a child born into a world where her efforts will never erase the word helot from her back. And yet, he also sees in her movement a certain fearless balance, in her mother's jaw a refusal that no whip has yet dislodged. The dissonance tears at him. When he returns to Sparta's barracks at night, the training fields feel smaller. The slogans hollower. Sparta is eternal, his instructors still say, but etched in his memory now are faces that contradict that certainty. Thaleia, her daughter, the nameless girls loaded onto carts years before. If Sparta is eternal, it is an eternity built on their stolen days. You are watching this from centuries away, through words and fragments, and yet the weight of that eternity presses forward. The story of Spartan warriors has been polished into legend, shields locked at Thermopylae, harsh discipline, unbreakable ranks. What rarely enters that legend is what you have just walked through. The quiet nights when victory meant girls counted like livestock, their futures sold or assigned with a nod. The mornings when a helot mother rose to toil not only for her own survival, but to feed the state that held a knife to her child's throat. Thaleia and her daughter are not in any surviving scroll. Their names do not appear on stone steles or bronze plaques. Yet the system that consumed them left traces in bones, in land divisions, in the very imbalance of power that historians chart on maps. By following one imagined thread through that tapestry, a composite drawn from patterns we know, you begin to feel the human cost behind the numbers. And that is the unspeakable truth. What Spartan warriors did to their enemies' daughters was not always a single, cinematic atrocity, easily pointed to and condemned. It was a slow suffocation, a turning of lives into units of labor and reproduction, an erasure so thorough that later admirers could talk of Spartan virtue without tasting the ash beneath. As epoch ensemble, you are not merely retelling battles. You are reopening rooms history tried to seal. In the echo of Thaleia's footsteps across that hard-packed floor, in the soft breath of her daughter asleep under a leaking roof, lies a question Sparta never meant you to ask. How many great societies are built on the futures of daughters who never had a choice?